long before the time of great kings and mighty prophets. In the days when the earth was still young, there lived a man named Hanoch, Enoch. He was different from the people of his time. While others lived for themselves, Hanoch walked closely with God. He sought to know God's ways, followed his commands, and lived a life of righteousness. Because of his deep faith and obedience, something extraordinary happened. Hanoch never tasted death but was taken to heaven alive. His story is short in the book of Genesis, but it holds a powerful message about faith, righteousness, and the reward of walking closely with God. Here are 10 key moments from Hanoch's life that reveal why he was chosen for this divine honor. Hanoch was born into a lineage of faithfulness, tracing his ancestry back to Adam through Seth. Unlike the descendants of Cain, who strayed from God's ways, Seth's lineage was known for worshipping and obeying God. Hanoch was the 7th generation from Adam, a position that symbolized spiritual completeness in biblical tradition. His forefathers, including Seth and Enoch, had already established a legacy of calling upon the name of the Lord. Growing up in a God-fearing family, Hanoch was influenced by their faith and devotion, which laid the foundation for his extraordinary walk with God. Hanoch was not just an ordinary man who lived and died like others of his time. He walked with God. This phrase signifies an intimate and continuous relationship with the Creator, marked by faith, obedience, and righteousness. While the world around him grew increasingly sinful, Hanoch remained devoted to God's ways, seeking his guidance in every aspect of life. His walk with God was not a momentary act but a lifelong commitment to holiness. Because of his unwavering faith, he became one of the few individuals in history to be taken to heaven without experiencing death. Hanoch became the father of Methuselah, who lived for 969 years, making him the longest living person in history. Genesis 5 verse 27. Many believe that Methuselah's lifespan was a sign of God's mercy, delaying judgment until his death. According to some interpretations, Hanoch received a divine revelation that as long as Methuselah lived, the great flood would not come. This suggests that Methuselah's life symbolized God's patience with humanity, allowing time for repentance. Hanoch, as his father, likely guided him in righteousness, continuing the legacy of faith that would later be passed down through Noah, Methuselah's grandson. Hanoch was not only a man of faith but also a prophet of righteousness. The book of Jude 1:14-15 reveals that he prophesied about God's coming judgment on the ungodly, warning people to turn from their sinful ways. This suggests that Hanoch was a preacher calling his generation to repentance. At a time when wickedness was increasing on the earth, he stood firm in proclaiming God's truth. His prophecy foreshadowed future divine judgments, including the great flood and the final judgment at the end of time. His life teaches that righteousness and obedience lead to God's favor and protection. Hanoch was granted extraordinary visions of heaven and the spiritual realm, as described in ancient Jewish writings like the Book of Enoch. He saw angels, the glory of God's throne, and even glimpses of the future of humanity. These revelations gave him deep spiritual insight, allowing him to understand God's plans for the world. His visions included the coming judgment of the wicked, the reward of the righteous, and the mysteries of the universe. Because of his faithfulness, God entrusted him with heavenly knowledge, making him a unique figure who bridged the gap between earth and the divine. During Hanoch's time, people commonly lived for over 900 years. But he lived only 365 years, Genesis 5 verse 23, which was significantly shorter. However, this was not a tragedy but a divine blessing. Unlike others who faced death, God took him away because of his righteousness. Many believe this was an act of grace, sparing him from the increasing wickedness of the world. His life, though shorter in years, was full of spiritual depth and divine favor. Instead of experiencing death, he was taken directly into God's presence, making him one of the most unique figures in biblical history. Hanoch's departure from the world was unlike that of any ordinary man. While others lived, died, and were buried, Genesis 5 verse 24 states that God took him, meaning he was taken to heaven without experiencing death. This makes him one of only 2 people in history, along with Elijah, to be directly taken into God's presence. His unique ascension was a sign of God's favor, showing that a life of righteousness leads to divine reward. His story remains a powerful example of how walking closely with God can result in extraordinary spiritual blessings, even beyond earthly life. Hanoch is recognized in the New Testament as a powerful symbol of faith. Hebrews 11 verse 5 states that he was taken from this life because of his faith, meaning he never experienced death. His story proves that faith is the key to pleasing God. He did not perform great miracles or lead armies, but his deep trust in God set him apart. His unwavering obedience and righteousness earned him a place in God's presence without facing death. His life teaches that true faith is not just belief but a daily walk with God, leading to eternal reward and favor. Hanoch's mysterious departure has led some to believe he will play a role in the end times, along with Elijah. He is one of only 2 people in the Bible taken to heaven without dying. Some interpretations of Revelation 11 suggest that these 2 men will return as the 2 witnesses, who will prophesy, perform miracles, and warn the world before Christ's return. Since Hebrews 9 verse 27 states that all humans must die once, some believe Hanoch and Elijah must return to fulfill this destiny. Whether literal or symbolic, his story remains deeply connected to God's future plans for humanity. Hanoch's life is a timeless message of faith and obedience, showing that walking with God leads to great reward. Unlike others of his time, he remained devoted to God, living righteously in a world that was turning sinful. His story teaches that those who seek God wholeheartedly will experience his presence, favor, and guidance in extraordinary ways. Hanoch's ascension into heaven without experiencing death serves as a reminder that a life of faithfulness has eternal value. His example challenges every generation to live closely with God, knowing that he rewards those who diligently walk in his ways. Conclusion. The story of Hanoch is short but powerful. He was not a king, warrior, or miracle worker, yet his faith and obedience made him one of the most honored men in history. He walked so closely with God that God took him away, sparing him from death. Hanoch's story challenges us today. Are we walking with God like he did? Do we live in faith, knowing that God rewards those who seek him? Like Hanoch, we can experience God's presence and favor if we choose to follow him faithfully.